Welcome to another edition of Front Row. Today I'm going to talk about a really hot topic, reform of state-owned enterprises. We can call them reform, we can call them restructuring, some people call them privatization. We'll figure out what the actual content of this conversation is. I have with me the chair of the SOE Restructuring Agency that has been recently established, Mr. Suresh Shah. Suresh, what's the right term? What's your preferred term?
Reform.
Reform, okay. Why are we reforming?
Because, Rohan, government, number one, government is doing things which they shouldn't be doing. So we need to get government to focus on their principal responsibilities. That's number one. Number two is, if you take the state-owned enterprises, they've caused serious inroads into the budgets of the country. So that needs to be adjusted because we are in a serious economic crisis. Thirdly, every enterprise is supposed to serve the people, give them the right goods at the right quality, right price, and so on and so forth. But you know that over the last few months, we've seen shortages of fuel, we've seen power cuts, we've seen shortages in gas, and so on and so forth. So all these things need to be corrected. So which is why we need to reform the sector.
But there'll be those in our society who say that this is an island nation dependent on tourism, and we need a national airline, and the government should be running a national airline. What's your response?
Well, we do need aircraft to come and go from Sri Lanka, that's for sure, being an island nation, not just for tourism but for many other things as well. Whether we need a national airline to have airlines coming in and moving out of Sri Lanka is the question mark. And I think we need to give that serious consideration. I'm not telling you that we are planning on either route A or route B. I'm simply saying that there are different options available in order to fix the issue that you spoke about. So just as much as you need a national airline to bring tourists in and take them out, for tourism you also need hotels, right? But government doesn't own all the hotels in the country.
It does own some.
It does own some, but not all. So the point I'm making is, yes, we do need tourism. Tourism needs to be a big sector in Sri Lanka. It's nowhere near what it should be. But whether that calls for a national airline in the way that we have defined it all these years is something that we want to go into very carefully, and we will take a very considered decision, and we will then advise government based on that decision that we take.
So you mentioned hotels. Now, one of the entities that you have been given, two entities that you've been given seem to have hotels under them.
Yeah.
So hotel developers, there's the Hilton, which to my understanding isn't making as good returns as comparable hotels such as Kingsbury, business city hotels.
Yeah.
And then we have the famous or infamous Hyatt, which is owned by the insurance corporation, which is in the list of things to be addressed. What do you think about this?
So Rohan, the first, you alluded to this. Why is government owning hotels? This is a big question mark. If you carefully consider why a government should own a commercial enterprise, I would think there are three fundamental requirements or reasons. One is it's got to do with national security. Secondly, it's got to do with a developmental activity. And the third is where the private sector is either unwilling to participate in a sector, or its participation is not sufficient to create sufficient competition within that sector. So under these three conditions, if the product or service is of an essential nature, then I think, yes, there is a case for government to be involved in the sector. Does hotel developers or the Hilton or the Hyatt qualify? I think it's a very clear no. So it's a big question mark as to why they ever were in government. So I think there is a very clear case where those two are concerned that they should move into private hands.
You brought up the question of national security. Now, I have been talking to Sri Lanka Telecom unions, and they're telling me that reduction of the government ownership below a majority will pose questions of national security. I have been talking to Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation, where they say that they insure defense establishments, and therefore Sri Lanka Insurance should be inside the government system. What's your response?
So on the second one, Rohan, a entity may insure within Sri Lanka, but these are all reinsured outside Sri Lanka in any case. So at the end of the day, I think around 95% of the insurance is reinsured outside. So I think, we need to take all of those into consideration. Sri Lanka Telecom, again, we will need to go into this carefully, but then when you look across the world, there are other nations that don't have state control over their telecommunications industries. The issue of national security needs to apply in those instances as well, and obviously they haven't. And I think there are many ways to build that cap. So we need to, like I said, even with Sri Lankan Airlines, we need to look at these things very carefully. We'll take considered decisions and make our recommendations accordingly.
Because the first time this issue of national security was brought up was by Mr. Lalit Athunath Budali in 1988, when he was Minister of National Security, and then we went ahead and privatized it anyway, and the actual management was under the Japanese, and nothing seems to have happened. So there might be some lesson from that for your deliberations.
For sure.
So let's focus on something like the insurance corporation. Right now, it seems to be operating on its own rules. It's operating life and general together. Quite a lot of these organizations are paying their employees payee taxes. What's going on? Are they in a special category that they have to be brought down to be like everybody else? Or what are we going to do about it?
No, certainly I think we need to create an environment which is a level playing field across the board for both the private sector as well as any sector that may remain within the SOE category going forward. So no question about it. I mean, Sri Lanka Insurance being the only insurance company that has life and general in the same legal entity doesn't bring the competitive requirement of the sector. I mean, every other insurance company has adhered to the law, and SLIC needs to do the same. So we can't have these special places for anyone, whether it's a private enterprise or whether it's a state-owned enterprise. I think we need to create the level playing field.
So in some cases, level playing fields might require broader actions, not a transaction around a particular company, corporation or entity like that, but instead looking at the sector, setting up a regulatory agency, changing the laws, stuff like that. So who's going to do all this?
Rohan, I think at the moment it's not clear whether, for example, take again telecom, the regulatory environment needs to be modernized, updated, like you were saying earlier, it's 1991. So we need to modernize that. Whether, I don't think the SOE Restructuring Agency will have the required capacity to do that, but we will make the recommendation, and then you will need different skills to come in to attend to those things. So we will certainly make the recommendations, and I think we will need to have the right people getting involved in making some of those changes.
But if I were to turn the mirror back onto you and say, how will your success be judged? Is it by the amount of dollars that you bring in terms of divestitures? Is it in terms of the new laws that you get pushed through? How will you be judged? How would you like to be judged? Let's put it that way.
How I would like to be judged is through the overall, I was explaining at the Chamber Summit some of the things that we have set ourselves as objectives. I would like to be judged on the overall success of all of those. Of course, different stakeholders are going to use different yardsticks. Some are going to use the dollar yardstick for sure. And so, different stakeholders will use different yardsticks. But for me, I really see this crisis as an opportunity to do the reforms, to do the right kind of reforms, and I think I would like to be judged based on that.
But let's assume that even if you personally don't want to be judged by that, there will be some weight given to the amount of dollars that are generated by this process. Because after all, the Prime Minister said, President said in the budget speech, certain contributions have to be made to strengthen our foreign reserves and so on and so forth. Yeah. Is there not a justification for another entity to look after the competition regulatory bodies to kind of balance you? Because they will have very clear objectives. This is what we are trying to do.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like I said, I think we need to address not just the divesting part, but we need to address a lot of other factors as well. And let's put the mechanisms in that get all of those things done. I don't think, as a unit, I don't think we want to say we want to be in control of everything. If we can think of a structure, if we come up with a structure that's ultimately going to deliver the results, then I think we need to work with that.
So people will be thinking about time. I mean, time is an important factor in all public policy activities. We are now almost at the beginning of 2023. Elections are coming. What results have to be achieved before that? Some of these entities might require more than the time that we have before the election to yield results. Are there any low-hanging fruit that we can see some results before that?
Rohan, I think, we shouldn't time these for elections. This is one of the mistakes that we've done in the past. We've had this very inconsistent policy framework that has governed this country. Political parties come into power and then they change what the previous government has done and so on and so forth. We need to do SOE reforms, and not just SOE reforms, but all the reforms that are needed to be done are not because the IMF has mandated it, but it's because we as a country need to, change the system, which is what the Aragale was all about, right? And so I think everybody needs to understand that these reforms are critical for Sri Lanka, and these processes need to continue irrespective of when the elections are held. So yes, there will be low-hanging fruits, and we need to make use of those as quickly as possible because, one of the objectives is, yes, the dollars need to come in as well. But I think the bigger picture here is that we need to get the reforms done irrespective of who is in power. And so we shouldn't limit ourselves by election times.
So the essence of that would be broad buy-in to the work of the SOE restructuring entity.
Absolutely.
What are you going to do about getting that buy-in?
I think we need to, so there are many stakeholders here. We need to proactively engage with these different stakeholders, the political parties, individual politicians, trade unions, the academics, and so on and so forth. We need to proactively engage with them, listen to their point of view. Where relevant, we need to take that point of view into account. We need to also, have some skills in trying to reshape their thinking as well. So I think this is going to be a process, and I think what's important is that we don't try to do these things from the back room, because that leads to this whole question of transparency and credibility. And I think one thing really important in a reform process, forget SOE, but any kind of reform, is that it is transparent, it is credible, and we get people on board. And we need to follow that, those principles.
I think that's a good way to end it. That's it for this episode of Front Row. Stay tuned for more.